everybody, welcome back. Today we will be talking about the all-new Commencal Meta V5. I was super excited to get my hands on this bike. A few that you actually asked, are you going to be riding this bike? And I reached out to Commencal here in Golden, Colorado, and they said, yeah, come take it for a spin, take it for a couple weeks, whatever you need, get the review done. So that was super awesome of them. They actually set up a lot of my preferences with like grips and tires and everything. So big thanks to Commencal for loaning me this bike for this video. So yeah, we'll just kind of jump right in. Start off with some geometry figures. The seat tube angle is 77.8 degrees, pretty steep, even by today's modern standards. 495 mil reach, again, that's kind of my magic number for an XL bike. 441.8 mil chain stays, a little bit longer. So large and XL have the slightly longer chain stays, and the small and medium bikes have shorter chain stays. I don't have that figure in front of me, but I do like that it's somewhat size specific. And the head tube angle is 64.1 degrees. So pretty slack there. All of those figures are almost ideal for bikes that I'm looking for these days, as far as kind of well-rounded all mountain bikes. So this is running on Commencal's new virtual contact system, which is a departure from their old platform. It's, you know, said to be a lot more playful, more pedally, you know, just more efficient all around. Funny, Commencal, they have like this little blurb about the virtual contact system on their site. And even in person, we talked about it a little bit, but it wasn't like, you know, a lot of these brands that have, let's say the DW link, they go on and on about how Dave Weigel landed on Mars on this linkage in 2001 and how efficient it was for the space program and yada, yada, yada. And there's all this hype around the linkage. And Commencal is just like, yeah, now there's 2 links. Enjoy, more poppy. And I don't know, that kind of is just them as a brand in a nutshell, right? Like they're like, here's a metal bike, go shred. And I really appreciate that about this brand. I think it speaks to a lot of riders too. Anyway, this is not completely the exact same spec as a signature build, but it's very close. They wanted to get me kind of the signature build spec. So it's running an XT drivetrain, XT brakes. The EX511s are similar to the M1700s that DT Swiss specs on the other Commencal bikes, but not exactly the same again. And then front and rear, Assegai and Maxxis Minion DHR, both of them double down, which is awesome. Yeah, Fox Factory suspension. And yeah, that's about it. Real quick on the drivetrain, you know, I've been riding kind of all the new Axis stuff for a while and now the new transmission. There is something to be said for grabbing your metal bike without a battery on the drivetrain. I don't know, you just don't have to think about it. A lot of times I get home from a ride, I throw my bike in the garage, and then I gotta go grab my baby. My wife is sick of me being out all day, and it's like, okay, here's the kids. You know, there's no like kind of time afterwards to get the little battery off and put it on the charger. So usually I have to think about it before my next ride, like, oh, do I need to charge my... Nope, just go out and ride your bike. There's cables, it all works. It works just fine. It's not quite as precise as some of the Axis stuff, but like, I don't know, who cares? Just go ride your bike. You don't need a battery and it all works just fine. I was very surprised. I actually just took this to my local bike shop to weigh it. With double down tires and EX511 wheel set, which isn't the lightest, this metal all mountain 150 rear 160 front mil travel bike weighed 33.1 pounds, which I don't know, we were all guessing at the shop. I thought 36 pounds, the guys thought 35. So we were really shocked, and this has pedals, not the lightest pedals either. So yeah, kind of hats off to Commencal for making a metal bike that is very aggressive with double down tires coming at 33 pounds. I thought that was very respectable. I've got carbon bikes that are definitely heavier with carbon wheels and not full double down setup. So that was pretty impressive. We'll talk about the setup real quick. You know, initially I set this bike up, I set the sag, rebound, everything kind of middle of the road, kind of how I start most setups. And I got it on the trail and I was getting bucked. I thought it was like, you know, in the parking lot it felt fine, but out on the trail, it just felt too chattery, too energetic. And honestly, the fork felt like it was diving a bit. So I came back, I dampened the rebound a ton on the shock. I actually lowered the shock pressure a little bit, ran a little bit higher sag. I think I'm at 30% now. And on the fork, I opened it up. There was one volume spacer in it out of the factory. So I added a volume spacer and actually increased the fork pressure by about 8 PSI and went back out, and it felt much more like I think this bike is intended to feel. So, you know, if you're buying this bike, the rear is very progressive. You might want to add volume reducers to the fork just off the get-go to make it match the rear more. Because again, it felt kind of divey. It didn't feel like it was matching the progressiveness of the rear end. And it was kind of a night and day difference. So definitely pay attention to your setup on this bike. Climbing, I was super surprised. This bike climbs very, very, very well. I had only demoed the last version of the Meta TR, and you know, it got up the hill. It was not a big deal, but it wasn't like a notably great climber. This bike is. This bike is very energetic. So yeah, the virtual contact system really helps with the climbing. It doesn't, you know, it sits really high in its travel. It's very energetic. It encourages out of the saddle climbing. It encourages you to go after little step ups that you see on the trail if you're that kind of rider. And yeah, so it's kind of departed from what I thought of Commencal as these like big, burly, not great climbing bikes. They've kind of flipped that. Now they're really great climbers, and they're all aluminum and not that heavy. So again, a couple of surprises with this bike. Pretty comfortable, pretty centered. We talked about the geometry. I guess my other note on that is the seat-tube angle is very steep, which is great when you're climbing kind of steeper stuff. But if the trail is kind of flat or mellower, I do feel that pressure on the hands, and that's not exclusive to this bike. Any bike with kind of a 77.5 degree or steeper seat-tube angle, you know, when the trails are flatter, you're just gonna have a lot of pressure on your palms when you're on flatter trails, and you're gonna feel it. On the other side, when you're climbing steep stuff and you wanna get up a little, maybe water bar or a little rock ledge, you feel very comfortable and confident to do so because you are so far forward on the bike. So, you know, you can't have it all, and that's kind of a choice that they made with the geometry on this bike, and I don't know, I'm a fan. Descending. Okay, so the last Meta TR, if you looked at all the reviews, everybody was like, look, they say this is a trail bike, but it really feels like more on the enduro end of a trail bike. It feels huge. That's not the case anymore. And this isn't the Meta TR, this is the Meta V5. So, you know, this is an all mountain bike, 150 mil rear, 170 in the front, full 29er. I'd say it's actually a little bit more on the lively kind of trail end of an all mountain bike. It is razor sharp handling. You start descending on this bike and you notice immediately any direction you want to go, you can go quickly. It is not a bike that you just kind of sit back and plow through rock gardens. This bike really requires an active rider who is like ready to kind of jump every rock garden, send it off every route. And it's very fun that way. It doesn't get super boring on mellower parts of trail. It's super energetic. If it's rolling, you can kind of like pump the bike. All of that energy is going to come back to you in speed. It comes out of corners very fast. And I think that's cool because, I don't know, I rode the Tempo and I thought it wasn't very fun on chill spots of trail. And now I'm feeling like this bike is fun on chill spots of trail, but I also didn't ride them at all the same places. Another thing this bike likes to do very well is jump. There's this little section at the beginning of the Hard Money Trail where after your first left turn, there's like 2 little doubles if you catch them. And this bike doesn't even think about it, just gets in the air quick, comfortably. It's super poppy. And again, just kind of is like riding the razor's edge. The one place where you start to feel this bike's limits is definitely just high speed, technical, gnarly terrain. It will start to deflect. All of that razor sharp handling, you know, has kind of a cost. And that is that, you know, you start deflecting, you might start to get thrown off trail if you're not on your absolute A game. Again, this is not the bike for the passive mountain biker who just wants to sit on the most plush big bike and kind of float over rocks downhill. This is for the person who wants to jump those rocks. This is for the person who wants the manual. Despite the moderately longer chainstays and, I don't know, super modern longer geometry, this bike manual is really easy. I'm not somebody who can just like send it manualing down parts of the trail, but I was able to get this front wheel up pretty easily and just kind of like put the front wheel down afterwards after kind of getting through a little technical section. You can't look at these bikes just by the numbers. If you do, you're going to be surprised when you get out and ride them and find that there are very different characteristics at play as a result of their suspension system, the kinematics, everything else going on with the bike. So again, this one was a little bit of a surprise for me. I've been on the Santa Cruz High Tower The version prior to this, which is actually really similar to this version, it just has a glove box. The Pivot Switchblade, and maybe even the Stump Jumper Evo. You know, I'd say of those three, this most closely compares to the Pivot Switchblade. I dare to say that this is a better climber than the Pivot Switchblade, which sounds insane because the Switchblade is full carbon. It's running a DW link that is just so renowned for its climbing. But I think, I don't know, this bike sat higher in its travel and was a more composed climber. I like that it's a little longer, I think, than the Switchblade, so you're just a little more centered on the bike. It's easier not to kind of get thrown off balance when you're muscling up some technical sections. But yeah, I'd say it most closely compares to that bike, and yeah, just kind of different demographic. You know, the Switchblade, dare I say, is your dentist bike. It's got DW Link printed all over it, Pivot's logos like 15 places, and they're very proud to put all these kind of crazy logos. There's logos everywhere out the wazoo. The Commencal is just like, I'm black and gold, I'm beautiful, look at this paint. There's a couple of little smaller, you know, logos down there on the chain, or on the seat stay rather. But other than that, it's just no fuss, beautiful, clean lines, and I really like that. It also happens to match my Land Cruiser, which shouldn't matter, but it does a little bit. Compared to the Hightower is definitely more of an all-rounder. It's a lot more kind of plush. You can get a little bit lazy. I personally didn't love the Hightower. I thought it was a little bit boring. Other reviewers have said the same, that it's boring in a good way. I thought it was boring in not a good way, which is funny because I love Santa Cruz bikes. I love the Tallboy, I love the Nomad, but the Hightower for some reason just didn't share the same DNA, and there was like a miss for me. It just kind of really disappeared in a not fun way on the trail for me, and I didn't keep that bike very long. This bike is not disappearing underneath you. It is very active. It likes to push back. So while those might be very similar in numbers, completely different on the trail. And they're both dual link bikes. They both approach geometry pretty similarly, and they're both kind of all mountain category, but ride completely differently. How it compares against the Stump Jumper, I'd put the Stump Jumper Evo more in the category with the Hightower, except maybe even more plush. The Stump Jumper Evo is a really light, really plush bike that you can get super lazy on the descents on. You can just kind of sit back and let it go over anything, and it just kind of floats. It does that beautifully. But I don't think it's as lively or jumps or pumps trail quite as efficiently as this bike. So again, just kind of two different types of approaches to the same problem for two different kind of riders. And with that, we'll kind of jump into like who this bike is for. And what comes to mind immediately, this bike is for your friend who drinks way too much caffeine. Your friend who has absolutely no chill, who's always kind of like jumping up onto the walls of trails and just getting into trouble on the bike. That dude who has no chill on the trail and just wants to get nutty and put all of their energy into every single ride. It's not for the dude who's like kind of sitting back and like riding very, you know, mellow. It's not for the guy who wants to just float over rock gardens and not pick up the front wheel. Yeah, I'm gonna leave it at that. I'm gonna cut it right there. It's for the dude who has no chill and drinks way too much coffee. So yeah, with that, I'll be giving this bike back to Commencal. Thank you again, Commencal. Let me know in the comments if you have any other questions. I get a little bit nervous when I shoot these. I forget all these, you know, I have my notes with me, but there's so much I forget to talk about. There's a lot of nuances in these bikes, so drop it in the comments below. Click, like, subscribe, do all the YouTube stuff, and yeah, let me know what you want to review next. This was largely a result of a commenter letting me know that they wanted this bike reviewed, and I was able to reach out to Commencal and get it done. So if you've got another bike you want reviewed, let us know, and yeah, I'd love to go ride it here in the Front Range for you. So thanks again for watching, and see you next time.